Most people believe manipulation is obvious. It isn't. The most effective manipulation rarely looks like manipulation at all. Every single day, psychological traps quietly shape how you react, what you say, and the decisions you make. A moment of pressure, a compliment that lowers your guard, a feeling of guilt, or the fear of looking wrong in front of others. These reactions feel natural, but they are rarely accidental. If you observe human behavior carefully, a pattern begins to appear. The same emotional triggers produce the same reactions again and again. People believe they are making independent decisions, but in reality their responses are often predictable. Once someone understands which psychological buttons to press, influencing another person becomes surprisingly easy. Real intelligence is not simply about knowledge. It is the ability to impose your will upon reality before reality imposes its will upon you. Machiavelli understood this, and the great strategists of history understood it as well. They knew that controlling people rarely requires force, only an understanding of how the human mind reacts under pressure, validation, urgency, and comparison. In this video, you will see the 7 psychological traps used against people every single day. And once you begin to recognize these patterns, something strange starts to happen. Conversations begin to look different. People's intentions become easier to read, and situations that once controlled your reactions suddenly become visible for what they truly are. Look around you for a moment. Walk through a crowded city street during rush hour. Watch the faces in the subway. Stand in line at a grocery store and simply observe people. Something strange begins to appear once you really start paying attention. Most people are moving through life on autopilot. They wake up when the alarm rings. They obey when the boss commands. They believe what the news anchor says. They buy what the advertisement tells them to buy. Their reactions are predictable because their behavior is almost entirely reactive. This is the first psychological trap, the illusion of independent thinking. People believe their opinions belong to them, but if you ask them why they believe what they believe, the answer usually comes from somewhere else. A headline they read, an opinion they heard, a belief they inherited from family or culture. Machiavelli understood this weakness in human nature. He wrote that people are so easily influenced by immediate needs and emotions that anyone who wishes to deceive will always find someone willing to be deceived. The person caught in this trap rarely notices it. They believe they are thinking freely, when in reality they are simply reacting to the environment around them. Psychologically, this creates what experts call an external locus of control. Every problem becomes someone else's fault. The economy, the government, their boss, their circumstances. And when a person believes everything outside them controls their life, they stop exercising the one power they actually have: conscious choice. Human beings have a deep fear of standing alone. Not physical fear, but social fear. The fear of being the only person in the room who disagrees. Because the moment you stand against the group, something inside your brain starts warning you. What if I look stupid? What if everyone turns against me? And that small moment of hesitation is exactly where the trap begins. People rarely manipulate you directly. They simply create the illusion that everyone else already agrees. Once that illusion is built, most people surrender their own judgment without realizing it. Look closely at how often this happens. In meetings, someone presents an idea, and a few people nod immediately. Suddenly, the entire room follows, even those who internally disagree, not because the idea is correct, but because no one wants to be the first person to challenge it. Psychologists call this conformity pressure. Your brain interprets disagreement with the group as a social threat. So instead of thinking clearly, you start thinking safely. And that is why intelligent people sometimes make incredibly foolish decisions in groups. Because the fear of isolation quietly overrides their logic. The awareness moment is simple. If you ever notice that your opinion suddenly changed only because everyone else agrees, pause. Ask yourself one question. Do I actually believe this? Or am I just trying to avoid standing alone? Because the people who control rooms are rarely the loudest ones. They are the few who remain calm enough to think independently. And the moment you stop surrendering your judgment to the crowd, this trap instantly loses its power over you. Guilt is one of the easiest emotions to weaponize. Not because people are weak, but because most people want to see themselves as good. So when someone makes you feel responsible for their disappointment, their anger, or their problems, something inside you immediately tries to fix it. You start explaining, you start apologizing, you start adjusting your decisions just to remove that uncomfortable feeling. And that is exactly where the trap begins. Because guilt doesn't always come from something you actually did wrong. Sometimes it is carefully placed there by someone who wants control over your choices. Think about how often this happens. Someone says things like, "I thought you cared about me. After everything I've done for you. I guess you're too busy for people now." None of these statements are direct accusations, but they quietly push you into defending yourself. And the moment you start defending yourself, the dynamic has already shifted. Now you are no longer acting from clarity. You are reacting from guilt. Psychologically, this works because human beings are deeply uncomfortable with the idea of hurting others. Even when we logically know we did nothing wrong, the emotional pressure still pushes us to fix the situation. So people agree to things they didn't want. They give time they didn't have. They make decisions that quietly move against their own interests, all just to remove the feeling of guilt. But here is the important realization. Not every uncomfortable emotion means you did something wrong. Sometimes it simply means someone else expected control over your decisions. And the moment you start recognizing that difference, the trap becomes visible. Because people who rely on guilt rarely argue with logic. They rely on emotion. They make you feel like saying no is selfish, like protecting your boundaries is cruelty. But psychological strength comes from understanding one simple truth. You can care about people without surrendering control over your decisions. And the moment you stop reacting automatically to guilt, something interesting happens. The people who tried to control you emotionally suddenly lose their leverage. Because guilt only works on someone who feels responsible for emotions that were never theirs to carry. Human psychology reacts very differently when something feels limited. The moment people believe something is rare, disappearing, or about to run out, their thinking changes. Suddenly, the question is no longer, "Is this a good decision?" The question becomes, "What if I lose this opportunity?" That small shift in thinking is exactly where the trap begins. Because scarcity creates emotional urgency, and emotional urgency weakens rational judgment. You see this everywhere once you start paying attention. Limited offers, countdown timers, only a few spots left, last chance today. These signals are designed to trigger the same instinct inside the human brain. When something feels scarce, the brain automatically increases its value, even if the thing itself has not changed at all. Psychologists call this perceived scarcity bias. The moment availability looks limited, people start reacting emotionally instead of logically. And once emotion enters the decision, control quietly shifts to the person creating the pressure. Think about how many decisions people regret later. Purchases they didn't need, commitments they didn't fully understand, agreements they accepted too quickly. Most of those decisions were not made calmly. They were made under the illusion that time or opportunity was about to disappear. But the moment you slow down and step outside that pressure, something interesting happens. The situation suddenly becomes much clearer. You begin to notice that many rare opportunities are not rare at all. They were simply presented in a way that triggered your fear of missing out. And once you recognize that pattern, the trap becomes much easier to see. Because real opportunities do not need psychological pressure to convince you. They remain valuable even after you take the time to think. So the next time something feels urgent, limited, or impossible to miss, pause for a moment. Ask yourself one simple question. Is this truly rare? Or is someone trying to make it feel rare so I stop thinking clearly? The moment you ask that question, the scarcity trap starts losing its power. Human beings have a strong psychological need to return favors. When someone gives us something first, even something small, we immediately feel a subtle pressure to give something back. It doesn't matter whether we asked for the favor or not. The moment someone does something for us, a quiet sense of obligation begins to grow inside the mind. And this is exactly where the trap begins, because people who understand human psychology know that favors create invisible debt. Once that debt exists, influencing your decisions becomes much easier. Think about how often this happens in everyday life. Someone helps you with a small task. Someone gives you unexpected attention. Someone does something generous that you didn't ask for. At first it feels like kindness, but later, when that same person asks for something in return, saying no suddenly becomes uncomfortable. Not because you want to agree, but because rejecting them makes you feel ungrateful. Psychologists call this the rule of reciprocity. It is a deeply rooted social instinct that keeps cooperation functioning in human societies. But the same instinct can also be used as a psychological lever. Businesses use it constantly. Free samples, small gifts, trial offers. The moment you receive something first, your brain quietly shifts from evaluating the offer to feeling obligated. And that emotional shift changes the entire decision. Suddenly, you are not deciding based on logic. You are deciding based on balance. You feel the need to repay what you received. The same pattern appears in personal relationships as well. Someone reminds you of everything they've done for you. They bring up past favors, sacrifices, or support, not to help you remember, but to increase the emotional weight of refusing them. And the moment guilt and obligation enter the conversation, your freedom to choose begins to shrink. But here is the important realization. A favor does not automatically give someone authority over your future decisions. Kindness should create appreciation, not control. The moment you understand that difference, the reciprocity trap becomes much easier to recognize, because genuine generosity never demands repayment through pressure. And once you stop confusing kindness with obligation, the invisible leverage behind many social interactions suddenly disappears. Human beings like to believe they are rational, that their decisions come from logic, careful thinking, and clear judgment. But in reality, most decisions are made emotionally first and justified logically later. And the moment someone understands this pattern, influencing people becomes much easier. Because emotional reactions are predictable. Anger, pride, fear, insecurity, these emotions are like buttons. And when someone presses the right button at the right moment, the reaction often becomes automatic. This is where the trap begins. People rarely try to control your logic. Logic is difficult to manipulate. It requires patience, explanation, and evidence. Emotion is much easier. All someone needs to do is trigger the right feeling. A small insult, a moment of disrespect, a comment that touches your pride. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer rational. Now, it is emotional. And emotional reactions are incredibly powerful because they happen quickly, faster than conscious thought. When anger appears, people speak before thinking. When pride is challenged, people defend themselves immediately. And in those moments, control quietly shifts. Because the person who controls the emotional atmosphere often controls the outcome of the interaction. You can see this dynamic everywhere. In arguments, one person provokes while the other reacts. The reaction becomes louder, more intense, more defensive. And suddenly the focus of the situation changes. The discussion is no longer about truth or logic. It becomes about emotional dominance. Once the reaction happens, the trap has already worked. This is why experienced manipulators rarely attack directly. Instead, they create emotional friction, a subtle insult, a sarcastic remark, a comment designed to trigger insecurity, not to win the argument, but to provoke a reaction. Because the moment you react emotionally, your attention shifts away from thinking clearly. You stop observing the situation. You start defending yourself. And the more emotional the reaction becomes, the easier it is for someone else to guide the direction of the conversation. But here is the important realization. Emotion itself is not the problem. The problem is automatic reaction. When a person reacts instantly to every emotional trigger, their behavior becomes predictable, and predictable reactions are easy to manipulate. Psychological strength begins with a simple shift. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause. You observe the emotion instead of becoming controlled by it. That short moment of distance changes everything, because when reaction disappears, the manipulation loses its effect. The insult loses its power. The provocation loses its purpose. And suddenly, the person who tried to control the emotional atmosphere realizes something unexpected. The reaction they were waiting for never arrives. And without that reaction, the trap collapses on its own. Most people believe openness builds trust, that the more they reveal about themselves, the more honest and authentic they appear to others. But the human mind does something strange with information. The more people know about you, the easier it becomes to predict you. Your fears become visible, your ambitions become obvious, your weaknesses slowly reveal themselves. And once someone understands those patterns, influencing you becomes far easier. This is why powerful people throughout history understood the value of restraint. Not silence, not secrecy, but controlled exposure. Because information about you is a form of leverage. The more pieces someone collects, the clearer the map of your mind becomes. Think about how easily people reveal themselves today. Opinions shared instantly. Emotions displayed publicly. Personal struggles explained to people who barely understand them. At first it feels like honesty, but every piece of information creates a small window into how you think, how you react, and what moves you emotionally. And those windows slowly remove the mystery around you. But influence often lives inside mystery. When people cannot fully predict you, they observe you more carefully. They listen more closely. They think twice before assuming they understand your next move. And that uncertainty quietly shifts the balance of power. This does not mean becoming cold or distant. It means becoming selective. Selective about what you reveal. Selective about when you reveal it. Selective about who truly deserves access to your thoughts. Because once information leaves your mouth, it no longer belongs to you. And the more control you keep over your narrative, the harder it becomes for anyone to manipulate it. When you start recognizing these psychological traps in everyday life, something interesting happens. Conversations begin to feel different. You notice the pressure behind certain words. You notice the subtle attempts to guide your reactions. And most importantly, you begin to see the moment where influence tries to enter your decisions. Awareness alone changes the game, because once a trap becomes visible, it loses most of its power. Now I'm curious about something. Which of these psychological traps do you see happening most often around you? Let me know in the comments. And if this video helped you see human behavior a little more clearly, make sure you subscribe. Because the deeper you understand psychology, the harder it becomes for anyone to quietly control your decisions. And the people who learn to see these patterns early are usually the ones who regret it the least later. Stay aware.